Welcome back to It Tastes Like Burning. This is Matt.
This is Jesse.
And we'll give you our precursor shot across the bow. Don't forget to like, click, subscribe, lick, approve, gold stars, emails, all that good stuff. Does help us. If you ever have any questions, concerns, comments, theories, interjections, inquisitions, recommendations, or just anything to complain about in general, you can always send it to us at ittasteslikeburningcast@gmail.com. And you can also find us at Twitter on
ITLBcast.
And you can also find us on Reddit. I'm trying to still build that up a little bit. It's the same subreddit, ITLBcast. We have a special guest with us today. We went looking through our journals and found in Plumbers Weekly, one of our members was actually in there. And I'm going to introduce everyone to Joseph, or Cornelius Joseph. Sounds like a good Russian name. And Joe, tell us a little bit about yourself. How long have you been on the department?
I've been on here for, I think, going on a little bit over 2 years now.
No.
Yeah, it's been about like 2 years.
Oh my gosh, how have we survived that long?
Xanax.
Okay.
Lots of Xanax. But you've been on about 2 years. The only reason why I even found out about this was because I moved out here from Arizona, and we thought we were having a gas leak. I've never smelt a skunk before in my life. So my wife called 911 because she thought our house was about to blow up.
I remember this call. It was kind of late-ish in the evening.
Oh, yeah, it was like 1 o'clock in the morning.
And as soon as we get off the truck, it's like, yep, someone pissed off a skunk.
And it was me and my 5,000 kids out front going, save us. And they're like, all right, man, go back inside.
So we recruited you on scene?
Yeah, pretty much. It was, it was our LT at the time that recruited me.
Okay. Yeah, I remember the call. Because we do get those. Quite a few, actually.
In that neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
I've been to a couple in that neighborhood.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of skunks in there. I got one underneath my house right now. There's too many of them.
So after you joined us, what have you made a career in the fire service, EMS, police? What are you looking at doing?
Right now, I just got hired over onto an EMS agency about 2 months ago, but my main goal is fire. But because of this department, it makes it pretty easy to get a job. From my experience doing clinicals and other areas, this department is really highly recognized. So it's pretty easy to get your name out there. But that's my end goal, is to be in fire.
And how old are you?
Right now, I just turned 27 2 days ago.
So before you came to our town and joined our organization, what were you doing before that?
Prior to that, I was a fighter. I was kind of traveling around the country and around the world, and I had a couple professional fights, a couple amateur, and then prior to that, I was in the United States Army.
Okay. What drew you to the fire EMS service?
My family has a long history of it. My uncle's a firefighter down in Arizona. My grandpa on my dad's side was a firefighter, and I got to see the trucks growing up, and plus ripping houses apart is pretty fun.
Okay. And do you have, now you're employed at an EMS agency. Mm-hmm. You said you're interested in going into fire. Are you interested in doing fire at EMS or fire or what?
I would like to do both.
Okay.
I like the medical side of it. I like the puzzle that when all of a sudden you have a patient and you got to figure out. Don't get me wrong, I like trauma and all that, but I like the puzzle of just having to figure something out, look for the clues and be like, okay, I think this might be it. You find a different clue and you got to scratch it and you got to find something completely different. I like that.
And what size department are you interested in? Big, small, medium, large, city, rural, what?
Honestly, I would like a medium department. I don't want to just be classified as a number, but I don't want it to be too small that we don't really do anything. I still want to make a difference and get my hands dirty. I just don't want it to be too big where it's not a family such as like this department.
Okay. Well, Jesse, you got any questions?
No, we're good.
Okay.
Boom.
Well,
how'd we survive 2 years? That's
I told you Xanax.
Only cut the department on fire once.
Yeah, and we won't talk about the other 37 lawsuits. So what we're going to focus on today, we're going to segue and talk into kind of about the podcast in general, how that's going, but kind of the stuff we've learned with it, but also the attempts of trying to grow, build, and develop the podcast, but that also directly relates into growing, developing, building your organization. Arguably, the two things are related. What you're going to learn in one facet's going to transition to the other. So I'm going to turn it over to Jesse and kind of let him overall. How do you feel about how we're doing with the podcast and growing and developing it?
Yeah, I think we're doing all right. I can't say that I didn't want it to be faster and better and bigger and all those things, but it's interesting to dive off into some of the data that we get, because we do get a lot of random data from the hosting company and from different players, the Apple, the Spotify, and it's weird because it's all disjointed, right? You get certain data from one that you don't get from the other, and it doesn't all add up, and it doesn't make sense. And of course, I don't know what I'm looking at, so it's just, hey, cool. There's a person that listened in Vietnam, so you have all these random places around the world where it's popping up on this map, and we get a kick out of some of that because 18 downloads in Israel,
Yeah. Or the number one leading Slavic nation of Croatia.
Croatia, and we're looking to, hit the people in the U.S. and definitely that. But, the neighbors to the north, Canada, we've had quite a bit of traffic from that direction too. And some of the random weird places in our country that pop up in the cities, that it just blows my mind. Like, we joke a lot about our Pacific Northwest listeners, but Seattle's a huge portion of our listening time.
Which makes no sense.
Really?
Makes absolutely no sense.
I think they're tuning in just to listen to your voice.
Just
Well, I have the hillbilly down. I'm pretty good at that, and country is all get out. But it's just weird because you look at that, and you look at, we see places in Tennessee and places in Texas, and the places in Texas are pretty apparent because that's where we are, and we know lots of people, and
Right.
and we know those people are, they know us, and they're listening, and they're talking to us about it, and all that. But we have all these other listeners that are everywhere. I mean, everywhere from New York to California, L.A., San Francisco, just everywhere. Arizona, Georgia. I mean, we've got the whole country covered in all these folks, and it's, not all of them represent people that just follow and listen regularly, and some of them are just one time, or they listen to 10 minutes and went, these idiots are done, which I think probably happens more than we know.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would suspect that the vast majority of them probably only get, we'll say, 2 to 5 minutes of listening time, and at that point they're like schmucks and just turn it off. And to kind of segue into growing your organization, it's the same concept. Is, we're talking about engaging an audience that doesn't know you. You have a limited window to do that, and you can make or break that, again, in that 2 to 5 minute window. And if you screw it up, that guy's gone, gal's gone forever. And then the question is how many other people do they talk to? So again, it comes back to the central issue of messaging. The only positive thing I can say to us is the little bit of inferred reference and discussions that we've had trying to grow, like on the Reddit side, because I do that. I've reached out to people on Reddit and actually had some pretty positive feedback on that end. And what does that look like? Well, you just browse the subreddit, find a topic, and you're like, oh, we talked about that last week. Sometimes I'll post it in the actual main page of the replies, and then other times I'll just send them a private message and just say, hey, I like what you're talking about here. We discussed this on our podcast, and I gentrify it and tell them, if you're brave or curious, click on this podcast and take a listen, and If you have any questions, let me know. And I do get the occasional hit off of that.
Oh, and that's apparent. I mean, that's where those Australian listeners come from. I have no doubt that those Australian listens came from Reddit. Why? How else would we have, gotten with those people? I don't think there's a huge part of the country that's searching and podcast players for volunteer fire department podcast. I think that's a pretty niche thing.
And I always kind of assumed that volunteer firefighting was more of, I don't want to say a Western theme, but I know the U.S. and Canada's dominated by volunteer fire departments. I was shocked at how big volunteer fire departments are in Australia, which makes sense just because of the rural nature and the small towns and the absolute colossal distances between, village to dell. The other one that shocked me is Germany. Germany's got a colossal volunteer fire department, entire infrastructure, and there's a lot there. Typical Americans, there's a lot there we should look at and kind of build, develop, and maybe try to implement over here. And the funny thing is that you see a lot of the Australians, Canadians, Americans, Germans, all the volunteer departments have the same general issue, is how do you get people in the door?
One thing from my time over in Germany was I got to meet a lot of them because I was over in Bavaria, which is pretty much the rural side of Germany. And some of those small towns in there, you'll have maybe a couple firefighters for an entire town. But they're able to make it happen. It's very interesting to hear how they do things and how similar it really is to how we do things.
Yeah, you talk about a completely different type of building construction, though.
Oh, yeah.
My God.
Oh, yeah.
It's colossally different. Not too many 1,000-year-old buildings that we've had to deal with here in Texas.
No, there's none.
Yeah.
I mean, there may be some caves carved out that people have lived in for over 1,000 years ago, but that's it.
I mean, I know it's not Germany, but I remember when Notre Dame caught on fire in Paris, and I was watching that, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh my God, that'd be so terrible dealing with that. One, it's truly a colossal structure. Two, the entire thing's wide open, but hey, at least it's like 300 feet tall.
And an international treasure.
Yeah.
Yeah, not just a national treasure, an international treasure.
One thing I've kind of wondered from hearing you guys talk, as I've listened to this podcast multiple times, and how you guys have said that sometimes you'll have a listener in Indonesia. What's some of the strangest places you guys have seen downloads that you didn't think would be possible to reach, maybe because of a language barrier or just because you didn't think it would get that far?
Vietnam.
Was that the big one?
Yeah, that's the one that's just puzzling. That, are these people just trying to learn English? Because I can barely speak English, so that's not the right answer.
Yeah, there's some weird ones out there. Vietnam's on there. Israel makes a little more sense though, just because there is a lot of English there. Croatia, that might be from one of our guys. Now that I think about it, because he's got some familial ties back to that country.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. The other strange one to me is just in the U.S. Seattle, Portland.
Yeah.
What?
Mm-hmm.
Again, Seattle and Portland rival Fort Worth.
Virginia Beach. Mm. That's one that just recently became a thing. With enough time that was at least a whole episode, right? That somebody dedicated some time to listen. New York City, Philadelphia, Norfolk, Virginia. These are city centers. These are not necessarily where the volunteer fire service is really at.
One thing I have learned and I've noticed, because I'm younger, so I spend a lot of time on social media, is just the rise in videos and just recognition of the volunteer fire departments. Most people don't even know that most of the nation is volunteer firefighters.
Yeah, well, and again, I think that comes back to something that I was going to. This addresses both things. It's messaging, and I think obviously I'm going to say all of our podcasts are great, but the fact of the matter is not all of them are created equal. And I think our dinosaur episode is kind of, particularly the fact that we caught it so early out of the gate. I think that's kind of
That was like a magic moment.
That was a good legacy thing, and that's messaging that's universal. Career, volunteer, doesn't matter. And again, it's how do you grow the podcast? Have an impactful, meaningful statement that's actually got some sort of contribution to it.
Yeah.
How do you grow your department? Have a meaningful statement that actually has a contribution to it. And I mean, I've just said it and said it and said it. I do not think that volunteerism's dead in the United States. I don't think it's dead anywhere in the world. I think the traditional messaging of treating it like it's 1950 is not the way to communicate today. You have to figure out how to communicate differently. And that doesn't matter if you're on a podcast. It doesn't matter if you're on social media. It doesn't matter if you're recruiting for your department. Stop treating it like it's 1950, because it's not.
Do you think that that's why a lot of people still view volunteer firefighters as just maybe hobbyists, is because of that old mindset?
No. Again, that's messaging. If the departments were doing the messaging correctly in their local area, then no. Well, okay, let's go down the rabbit hole on that. How do you address it? Well, you're going to have to put time, energy, and effort into addressing it. You are going to have to do something to physically address it. What is that thing? That's entirely dependent upon your neighborhood, community, town, city. If you're truly in the middle of nowhere, okay, but Australia, all right, well, there's a good chance that in a town of, let's say, 500 people, everyone's going to know that you're volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But let's say you're in suburban Virginia. Okay? There's a really good chance that they don't know what an ESD tax is, much less that you're actually volunteer. But you have this stellar fire department. Maryland, Virginia have some truly incredible volunteer departments that are ESD, and they function literally like a career department, minus the fact that they have volunteers.
And I think some of that is misnomers that you've got, and you do have untrained, unskilled departments and members in departments all over the place. They're out there. And you've got, there's a certain amount of that, but we have guys that log over 200 training hours a year out of this department.
Right.
Yeah.
That's colossal. There's paid guys out there that don't get 200 hours of training a year, period.
Yeah, well, I mean, hell, even if you drop to the bottom of our list, most people are at 40 to 80.
Yeah.
That's the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, it is, there's no silver bullet to this discussion. Yeah, I can't just tell you, go out, put up a yard sale sign and not have a yard sale, but just make it a recruiting event. I can't tell you that's going to work. I can tell you if you do that with 75 other things that month, that might work. All of it combined. Because if you're doing one event and you're bringing in one person off of it, if you did 10 events and you brought in 10 different people, which one worked?
Yeah.
Well, technically, all of them.
Right.
It means you had to do more. And as you're doing more, you're going to figure out pretty dang quick which ones to do and which ones to not do. Let's say you do 3 events. You had 5 interested off of one, 4 interested off the second, and 0 off the third. Which one should you probably drop and then dump more time into?
Yeah.
Probably 4 and 5. But you got to do it. Can't sit there and complain about it.
Yeah, and it's all proportional too. And I think people lose sight of that, because if you're in a population of 250, 300 people, if you've got 6 or 8 firefighters, that's probably proportional, right?
Sure.
You know, if you're in a city of 10,000 and you have 100, that's probably proportional.
That would be one hell of a number. And we could do like we'll just call it a general survey. And we could do that pretty easy for our area, at least our county,
Yeah.
and sit there and say, you have X amount of people in your district. So just for simple math, we're going to just say there was 10 districts in this county, and we'll just pretend that the population is evenly distributed across that 10 for 100,000 total. You know, you'd be able to identify pretty quick off of that, because not all the departments are going to have the same membership totals. So if you had one department that had 70 members and you had another department with 5, I would probably be asking the 5, like, why are you not talking to the one with 70 to figure out what the hell they're doing? Because you can't tell me that they're just completely on the other side of the fence. The grass is greener, softer, taller, the sun's always shining. You know, what?
Yeah.
So, and with that, you know, a little bit of honesty with yourself and the organization too. There's nothing wrong with admitting there's things to work on. Doesn't mean you're terrible leadership or you're a terrible person. It just means that we've identified some of the crap we need to work on. Mm-hmm. And there's always something.
Oh, without a doubt.
Oh, yeah.
Jesus, at the end of the day, I can guarantee you the amount of stuff that you're fixing, solving, and truly accomplishing anything on is more on how fast is this going to burn me or the organization to the ground. Yeah. So the priorities shift on it pretty hard and pretty quick. And again, going back to the podcast, tying that together, same thing. Trying to build, grow, and develop your community. It's just an exercise. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. We'll release the podcast. We'll see what the viewership numbers are on it. And that in itself is information. And the question is can you take what you did off of the podcast and turn around and figure out how to apply it to your own organization?
When you're going from like a leadership standpoint, this kind of ties into both. How do you come up with that formula to really get that word out there to your community to try to bump up those volunteer numbers?
If you knew the answer to that, sell it, because it's worth billions of dollars.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're not the only volunteer organization out there that needs that answer. Everyone needs that answer. And if you have the answer to that, like I said, it's literally worth billions of dollars.
And I think the answer varies. I don't think in any geographical location the answer is the same, right? It's going to vary because the demographics of the communities vary.
Yeah.
If you take a heavily elderly retirement age community, that it's different because the pool of people that are actually accessible to you shrinks. That population of those people that are 70 years and above are really not, they're not the ones that are going to do it, right? They've got health problems, they've got all these other things, and that's just not where they are in life. But if you're a general population of college student age people in a college town or something like that, it may be way easier to find people that are willing to not be drunk all the time and come be a fireman. And I think that just like everything else, it's all over the place. But I think the one constant that you got to look at is that it is not 1950. You've got to get your mind out of the box of what was always happened. Don't let what is that saying you say? Don't let tradition stand in the way of
progress.
Yeah. Hundreds of years of tradition impeded by progress.
Yeah.
To kind of carry along that, you have, I don't want to describe this. So if you're, it's economic and it's demographic, period. If you're in a college town, you're not going to recruit college kids the same way that you're going to recruit as if you do live in, like, let's say, a retirement village. And I'm not saying you're not going to have perfect candidates out of both, okay? But it's a completely different type of person you're reaching out to. Vice versa. What is the economic breakup of that community? I assure you there's plenty of millionaires, tens of millionaires, hundreds of millionaires that volunteer. Plenty, okay? But they're not going to handle a, for a lack of better words, shot off the cuff, Uncle Larry's bait and tackle shop and fire department type of setup. They're not. College kids, they're not going to take a monolithic draconian department. Not going to happen. Now, I'm not saying that you completely abandon the fire traditions. That's not what I'm saying. But you do have to mold and develop your department to what your community, one, provides, and two, what the needs are for your community. And to hammer on that 1950 anymore, and I just don't think a lot of people really consider this. In 1950, if you lived in rural America, you had three things to do: God, family, and work. That's it. Okay? Maybe you watch TV, maybe listen to the radio, but that was it. Your life was dominated by God, family, and work. All noble things. But if you had a guy that desperately wanted something else to do, what was he going to do? It's not like hobbies were really a thing. Yeah, he maybe did some fishing on a riverbank, or maybe he occasionally went out and did something with his family, but realistically, that just wasn't the setup at the time. You fast forward to today, you have a competition, same thing, God, family, work. The kids are in 500 school events, TV, internet, hobbies, economic times present, second jobs, third jobs, cost savings, on and on. The things you're competing against, just on the internet side, YouTube, Netflix, HBO, on and on. These are billion-dollar companies that have entire departments that spend billions of dollars on recruiting viewers. And that's what you're competing against. So you have to be able to sell something to these individuals that gets them to not just plop home and watch TV. Not saying you steal them from their family. You kind of need them to still do that. That makes a lot of sense. But in 1950, if all you had was God, country, or God, family, and work, well, the fire department, chances are the wife maybe even grabbed the guy by the ear and dragged him down to the station. It's just like, God, get him out of the house. He's driving me insane. They'd come to the station. They had a whole bunch of basically dudes to hang out with, and it wasn't God, family, and work.
Small little community center that
Right.
a niche group could go to.
And that is also why the volunteer fire departments were basically a power dynamic from pre-1980 because of that. Because it was an avenue and an opportunity for all of them guys to have a place to go and just be able to take that break from the church and from their family and from work.
Well, and men will congregate together. Men build off of each other. Men look to each other for support as men, right? And I'm not discounting the ladies that are in the fire service at all. I'm just, if you look historically back onto it, that was a big portion of what brought those guys into the volunteer fire service. It was a group of men. And most of them were like-minded, and most of them had a common goal, and it was that ability to do something that was bigger than yourself. You fast forward today, well, there's hundreds of different opportunities for men to go hang out with, from the sports bar to the, whatever, the DraftKings or whatever they're into, and the access to entertainment is completely different than it was.
Limitless now.
Yeah, it's limitless. So,
And I think the realization to carry what you're saying is, and it was amplified by COVID, And I think for the first time in the last 70 years, people realized for the first time in their lives, they were by themselves.
Yeah.
And they Netflixed and chilled for about 2 weeks and then had nothing else to do for the next 6 months. And they realized that sucks. Because once you consumed all of your time watching TV, okay, they pick up a hobby. Well, they've never had the hobby before. Realistically, most people aren't going to finish through with that. And all of a sudden, they realize that there's this major social part of their lives that they didn't realize that they needed. And the fire department, oddly enough, is a place of refuge. It was something that I tried to work the angle a little bit on here in our area. The difference is that COVID lasted all of about, and I'm not kidding when I say this, about 2 months in my area. And by the end of, realistically, May, no. My city and county was so done with COVID that while everyone else was truly just creeping into the edge of lockdowns, senior citizens were doing cartwheels down the street. This was our area. COVID was a non-event by the end of May. Now, you still had corporations that were doing their thing, and you still had businesses kind of doing their thing, but the population as a whole, no. They were basically done with it in 2 to 3 months.
One thing I think COVID really did shine a light upon was that people's lives were pretty easy. They didn't really go through any struggles with anything. And then they found something that they can struggle with someone that's going through the same struggle. And that's how you really build bonds. And I think that attracts a lot of people because I know I'm going through this suck, but you're going through it with me. And that makes it better. And you're able to actually be proud about something that a lot of people weren't really doing back then. A lot of people were just on their phones. They're kind of just going through the day-to-day life. And then they realized when COVID happened, a lot of it was fake.
And I can see, like, within our own membership at the time, generally people were in two types of, I'm going to call it funks during all that, because realistically COVID was about 1.5 years long. And the people that were part of our organization, and we still followed COVID protocols and decounting the station and, maintaining distancing and all that, screwed up training beyond belief and screwed up our meetings and on and on and on. But the mental health of our membership was exponentially better than any other random, we'll call it community, that we bounced into and spoke with at the time during the COVID. You had people that weren't part of our department, but, they couldn't go to church anymore. They couldn't do their social activities, and they're just locked away. And the long-term implications off of that was obvious to me. It really did. It really affected people. And we never saw that effect with our membership. Really didn't. Because we were able to still, and I assure you, we had plenty of people, particularly older, that were taking COVID very serious, and they were damn good about social distancing and washing their hands and, but they still found their way to participate. And it worked for them. And, I mean, again, it was just, and that event shined a light on our organization. Because people couldn't believe that we were still quote unquote operating, which to me is asinine, because it's like, well, what the hell were you expecting us to do?
Yeah. It'll go out eventually.
Yeah. I mean, and I had conversations like that where they couldn't believe that the fire department was responding to stuff. And it was like, I must have missed a memo.
Was that a common conversation that people...
I wouldn't say common, but I had it a handful of times. And it's just like, I had one complaint on that. One.
Yeah.
Someone actually called the city and complained that we were responding to calls.
Wow.
Needless to say, our city handled that phone call for me. and I didn't have to talk to anyone on that.
Good thing.
How do you even justify calling on a fire department for helping people?
I don't choose to well, I do, but not here. Tell you what I really think of that, because it's just pretty sad if someone's at that point.
And so we started this whole podcast with a conversation on these same lines, and not surprising, that episode number 1 is absolutely the most popular one because it's been out there longer, right? But right on its heels is that dinosaur episode where we talked about, just the positive attitudes and negative attitudes and how that those people that are always going to choose the glass half empty affect your organization, right?
And to come full circle with what you're talking about, that applies to how you run the department, that applies to how you recruit, and that's going to apply to your messaging and social media or a podcast. If you sit here and just try and baby seal club everyone all the time and, holier than thou, what's your message? God almighty, the look inside out or outside in is not good.
Yeah, and I think a lot of departments get caught up in that, and they put themselves on this pedestal that they're so elite that all those peasants down there in the community are below us, that they just don't open the doors to let people in. I think that happens more than any of us would want to admit, right?
Well, I can definitely say X amount of time ago that was our organization. I mean, it's not something I changed because that mental shift had happened while I was here. So that's happened in the last 12 years, but it was with the previous chief. He really did a good job of really getting this archaic dinosaur ideology squashed, which was an absolute pain in the ass for him. I think the thing that helped with that is that the handful of young men that were helping to push that we'll call it generational change also did the legwork and put the time, energy, and effort into actually talking to the old guys. Yeah. And, trying to get everyone on the same page. And it's not that they agreed, but they at least understood what the hell was going on. And it made all the difference in the world. The irony in this is because the time, energy, and effort that was put in early paid off on the back end, because as they started to see the change, they got to be a part of the change, and they accepted it and welcomed it. Yeah. And you need the old guys. One, because you need them, because of their knowledge and their experience. They have a ton to contribute, and it's just, frankly, more life experience. They might be able to actually help you make the segue 10 times easier.
Well, and generally those guys are way more even-keeled.
Right.
Right? They're not all over the place. A lot of times the young guys are so with the wind that they can't sit down and focus about one thing for very long. So that whole episode of the dinosaurs and attitudes was really focused on being positive and being uplifting of people and having a positive impact on people, not just your members, but your community and everything else. And we get criticized sometimes because of the kinder, gentler fire service. Well, there's nothing wrong with being kind. Gentle's maybe we are, I don't know, but there's nothing wrong with compassion and kindness in what we do. I mean, we're literally, our organization is here to help people, right? Preserve life and property. What part of that is not kind?
People that disagree with that are usually just not happy people.
I don't know it's that they necessarily disagree with it. It's just, again, the tradition of being treated like crap because you're the new guy doesn't mean that tradition needs to be carried on.
Right.
There's a big difference. I legitimately don't. Well, I'm sure there's one turd out there, but legitimately, if you're on the volunteer career department, your intent is not to cause hate and discontent. It's just, that's not the nature of the person. But you get jaded, you have whatever, frustrations, traditions get involved. And it's just, again, time moves on. It's always going to be progressing. And right, wrong, or indifferent, our ideology, our technology, our history is still progressing forward. And we've moved to this time where we are at right now, whether we like it or not. And again, trying to establish your department as a standout, as the last bastion of whatever. Maybe it is the absolute temple of kindness, or maybe you're just an old dumpster. I mean, you're going to have a mental image either way projected upon you by the community off of that, and it's going to be represented by your membership. Yeah. And if your membership doesn't have anything positive to say about the organization, you're screwed.
To kind of piggyback off of that, I was saying that when I was in the military, why people were the way they were was because they said I had to go through it. Well, like, for instance, leadership would be like, why do we need to make these boys go through that? It's just got to make them angry. It's just got to upset them. Well, because I had to do it when I was their age.
Right.
And it just keeps trickling down, and eventually someone breaks it. And like you were talking about a couple of years ago, the mentality of the department finally broke, and the new guys slowly started building that up into what we are today.
And there's some value in going through some of those traditions. I mean, there is some value in some of that stuff. There's no reason why the new guy can't have to have some responsibilities of cleaning or something at the firehouse or icing coolers or whatever those responsibilities are.
I agree.
There's nothing wrong with that tradition of that initial period of making sure that they have a work ethic, because that's what you're doing. But to go beyond that to the point of just literally beating them down to nothing, well, we're not building them back because they leave, right? You don't get the opportunity that they had in the military to break them down and build them back up, because they're here on their own accord, and there's nothing holding them here. We don't have them under contract. We don't have, there's not a paycheck dangling. There's nothing to keep them here other than the want to be here. So if you take away that want, what are you left with? An empty spot in the roster. That's what you're left with.
I think there's a difference between structure and hazing. I believe there's the discipline aspect. I think a lot of people come here searching for that. I did when I was coming from the military. I wanted to come to somewhere that structure where I actually had to do what I needed to do, not just for me, but because for the betterment of a different organization.
I'm going to step out on thin ice here. I don't necessarily have a problem with quote-unquote hazing. The question is what are they being hazed? How? How are they being hazed? Are we beating them with a hose filled with sand? Or are we literally, in good jest, constantly making fun of them and encouraging them to also make fun of you back?
Yeah.
One of the bigger things that I tell, particularly kind of like the fire service gets weird people. Every single person here is weird. And one thing I tell the new weird people that are maybe a little extra weird is, look, if you want to know if you're doing fine on the department, are people talking to you? Are people making fun of you? Are they helping you when you ask questions?
You said that
because at the end of the day, if you're getting attention, that means you're liked. The absolute death sentence in that is when no one talks to you.
Right.
Something's wrong. And that individual, you need to do a little bit of self-reality check on that and figure out, am I too weird, or is there something else that I've done? Because if you're sitting there and you're not sure what's going on, then I tell you to go find like the most honest person on the department that's not the kindest. Usually those two people aren't the same. And tell them like, look, I've realized this and I legitimately don't know what I'm doing wrong. And see if you can hammer it out. Again, I'm not talking about, we can go all over the place with hazing. I don't have a problem ribbing the new guy. It's a way for them to find not only their place in the department, but for lack of better words, it's acceptance. It's how you know you're part of the team. Again, are you ruthlessly beating them with a waffle iron? Well, okay, guys, that's not hazing. That's assault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Versus, are you giving the new guy hell by giving him a giant wooden spoon and telling him to go stir the tanks?
That was the advice you gave me when I first came here because I was a little worried. And you said, "Aren't we making fun of you?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Then we like you. When we stop doing that, that's when we don't like you anymore."
Yeah.
That's when you're not accepted at that point because no one wants to crack one open with you anymore at that point.
Yeah, and it really is. It's just the fact of the matter. The fact of the matter is the social dynamics of our organization require you to be made fun of by everyone. It also means the door's wide open and fully expected for you to make fun of everyone around you at the same time and even deflect on some other poor sap that's sitting there harmlessly.
Well, and also that the guy that's getting ribbed a little bit, if he just goes into full-fledged fight mode,
Oh, yeah.
that guy can't be here. That guy can't be here. Because there's going to be those incidents on scene where some bystander's going to push your buttons, some dad's going to push your buttons, whatever. And that person's going to blow up, and it's going to be on the front page of the paper of them just beating the crap out of somebody on a wreck scene or a house fire or whatever. And you've got to kind of know that. Like, we have to figure that out, and that's where some of that plays in and has an important role in what we're doing.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think that's a good tool to kind of see if a person, because in the fire service, you will be in very stressful situations and potentially be put in very stressful situations. If you can't handle a joke on the department, is that kind of a way that you guys can kind of tell what stress you can kind of deal with?
You can kind of do that, but it's not necessarily the best litmus test.
It's
But
more of a
but
test.
it's just a tool to complete that test.
It's more of a test of somebody's temperament, right? Like I was saying, if they just have a bad temperament and they're going to immediately bow up the first time somebody picks on them just a little bit, that person doesn't belong at your fire department.
Particularly when you get to something truly innocuous and retarded. That why are you getting infuriated over this? And it's something obscure like, well, my Chevy's better than your Dodge. And I mean, they detonate. Nope, a red flag. Auto ejecto right there. Because again, if they can't handle that discussion, wow, what are you gonna do when you're on scene and something truly goes crossways? You know, you have an assignment and then another department comes up and tells you to do something else because it's their scene, and they detonate. What?
While we're on this subject from a leadership perspective, what are some of those red flags in the early stages when someone's coming in that you're looking at that can kind of give you hints if they're able to kind of handle the high stressness of this job? Besides actually being there and watching them not freak out.
Well-
Go ahead.
And I think that's an important part, and we've talked about a lot, that you've got to get them on calls early out the gate. You've got to put them in those situations where they're not necessarily who you're depending on, but they're there, right? So, you know, you're not putting them in the week one. They're not making the entry, but they're on the scene and they're seeing what's going on, and maybe they're humping hose, maybe they're doing some of those ancillary tasks that the scene requires, but you're seeing how they cope with what's going on. But at the same time, you don't want to just push them off into the pit and say, swim your way out.
Right. Your red flags you're talking about, I'll give you two. And then I'll give you like an actual, this is like worst case scenario, and it's a true story. Someone that overly dwells on something. All of us are going to handle trauma and tragedy differently. Here at our department, we highly encourage people to talk about it, get it out, always better out than in. But if you're 8 months in, which in our case is too long, but if you're 8 months in and they're still talking about and verbalizing and how gnarly a specific call was. And you were on that call and it wasn't that big of a deal. So again, they're hyper centralizing a call and they're dwelling on it and then they're lying about it. That to me is a red flag right there, a big one. Perfect example of this. Years ago, we had a very bad call that was result in someone's loss of life. And this guy, new member, for lack of better words, does everything in his power to get in and see this scene. Okay, that's odd and a red flag. So first one is he won't follow orders. Number two, for not to make it comical, but for lack of better words, he literally Kung Fu Panda rolls into the house, and you would have thought he was a National Geographic photographer. And I mean, the thing just gets so overly dramatic so fast. Then we get back to the station, and on the ride back to the station, he won't shut up about it. And it's I don't know what the hell's wrong with you. It was a morbid fascination is what it was, because the idiot couldn't figure out how to shut his mouth, and he started talking about some stuff that was previous there. And it's oh, we're going to call the FBI because you need to be on a watch list if there isn't one, because you're insane. So that's part of it. Let's go to something that's not nearly as extreme as that. Typically, the fire service is associated with pretty strong A and B personalities. And you can have someone that's just an over-dominating ass. That's a red flag to me, because there's a lot of teamwork in this. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of leadership and there's a lot of structure and there's a lot of following orders. But sitting there and just walking up and flopping your resume out and saying, this is the answer, that's not the answer.
That's not never the answer.
That's not an answer to a damn thing. That doesn't impress me at all. And again, to me, that's understand if it's a job interview, you're supposed to brag about yourself. You're on the organization. We know about you now. Could frankly care less what your background is. We know it. And the fact of the matter is it's not with this organization. It's not how we necessarily do it, and it's not with our membership. Doesn't mean that your training, expertise, and background's not appropriate and maybe even the best answer for the current problem, but handling it as you've got your box of toys and you're stomping around and you're going to throw an absolute fit unless we do it exactly how you want it done, nope, red flag. Because it's not teamwork. That's not teamwork.
And on the other end of that is the guy that's just so absolutely timid that they just can't engage into anything.
And we've had one person here like that. Really good guy. I have nothing but really nice and incredible things to say about him. But when I say his demeanor and attitude was like a kick dog that rolled over and started to pee on himself anytime he was around anyone, that's what he was like. And I'm telling you, our membership ate him alive because it was so timid and so, catch a word, beta. Even like our fire department patron saint reacted to it. The lizard brain subconscious reaction. Even our patron saint saw it and just pounced on it. And it's oh boy, man, we didn't kick him off. We addressed it and did everything in our power to literally poke him with a stick and be like, hey man, be more assertive. Do not let people do this to you. This is a bad habit, like really bad habit. I'm not saying you need to change your character, personality, and disposition, but you need to take some acting classes.
Yeah.
Okay, and adopt a persona and a character that maybe isn't you, Okay, but you can't allow people to treat you this way. And again, it's not that they were beating him with a rubber hose, but they were. The membership was, truthfully, it wasn't good.
Just
It
eating
wasn't.
him alive.
They were eating him alive, and it was literally because of the way he was presenting himself to the members. It's the only time I've ever seen that.
Yeah, and I've seen it a time or two. It's truly the guy that's just, for lack of better words, already been beat down and it's never
Right.
come out of a shell, so to speak, and probably got pushed into membership by somebody else.
In this case, what you described is exactly what happened. And I will. Don't get me wrong. The membership, they never physically did anything to him. Realistically, 99% of the time, everyone would do the same thing: normal ribbing, nothing too extreme. Well, sure, it was foul, but nothing extreme. But every now and then, boy, they'd turn into terror. And boy, I'd be here occasionally. It's like, you guys got to stop.
Sense the fear.
Yeah, it was. And our organization doesn't condone this. This, like I said, it's, if you've never experienced it or never witnessed it, it sounds terrible what I'm describing, but I mean it when I say this. This person was self-inflicting catastrophic amount of we'll call it social damage to themselves, and it was because of the way they were projecting themselves as just fresh blood in the water. And this, they never said a word. It's the way they were interacting with people. And it was really hard to not react to it because everything was so diminutive and so passive, and just it's not healthy. And then the thing I was impressing was like, oh my God, forget this organization, man. Like in the real world, your bosses will eat you alive. You can't be like this outside of whatever the deepest, darkest corners of your mind, because you're instantly a target and you've never said anything. Your entire body language is wrong. Let's take it one step further. We're on a bad call, and that person's the one talking to the patient.
Oh,
you can't have that.
No.
you have to show confidence that you know what you're doing.
Right. You can't be diminutive, and you can't be so, well, hell, another victim. You just can't. There's got to be, for lack of better words, at least a steady base there, calming effect, not the passive, oh God, something's going to happen at any second type body language. That's no benefit to anyone on a scene.
Yeah, and the other person, and the third category, and I'll just lump it all together, is a person of questionable moral character. Right? That's the other big red flag. So the guy that picks something up on a scene or out of somebody's house, or just bad moral character when it comes to the opposite sex, or just one of those things that you just go, oh man, I never in my life would consider what just happened there. That person needs to exit stage left as soon as it happens.
Is that something you guys have seen?
I've seen it.
Oh yeah. Hell, I've seen it on the opposite side of that too, where you have a really domineering personality, kind of the exact opposite of the one guy I was just describing. And you get on the other side of it, and they're so ultra aggressive in everything they do. And then you're around them a little bit and you start to interact with them, and you're like, wow, that guy's got some questionable stuff. Oh, he did something just then that's questionable. And then the people like that, they it's like Yahtzee. They're going to keep rolling the dice just to see how far they can get with it, because it's terminal. If you look in their careers, they're usually the most beneficial person to the organization that's ever come in the door, but they're also the most self-destructive individual you've ever encountered in your life.
Yeah. One of the big ones is the I the horn dog, let's call him, the guy that just he can't go to a call without trying to pick up a woman, and that guy right there is a detriment, and it happens. I've seen that guy a lot. He shows up and like it's there's no focus on what's actually the task at hand. It's about what's her face standing over there, and I'm going to go impress her and try to take her home, whether she's a fellow member or a bystander or whatever, right? Or the victim that you're trying to rescue.
Why do you think such organizations like volunteer firefighting brings out those questionable personalities that try to do something like this?
Well, I wouldn't say it's just indicative to volunteer firefighting. I mean, you're going to see the hero complex at a Marine recruiting station.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I mean, them guys see them all the time. And I can guarantee you every single Army recruiter, military recruiter has that guy that was a complete and abject disaster, but he was the greatest thing that was on the face of the earth. It's just we get that brand of crazy that decided to walk in the door.
And I think it's proportional to society. I don't think it's disproportional at all.
Okay, yeah, that was kind of where I was going at. If it was disproportionately more.
No, I don't think it's disproportional. I think it's just proportional to society, because those people exist in society anyway. We get the same amount of them that would show up at any other thing to do, right?
I mean, I'll use a really cheap example. You're not going to see a psychopath walk off the street into a volunteer fire department and immediately read the situation and see that the department has, let's say, a 25-year chief that's been really popular and be able to find success there. Yeah. So a psychopath is going to bounce out pretty quick. Sociopath will get washed out pretty quick. Then you get into all the other weird side crap. And it's just their flavor of whatever. And we had an open sign on, doors open, and they just waltzed in at that moment. Outside of the classic firebug, I don't think you particularly have someone that's directly interested in, let's just say, like the fire service in general. But yeah, you're just going to get your slice of crazy that occasionally comes in the door.
And usually that firebug gets cast out in the interview process. That's pretty easy to pick through that in that.
It's happened 3 times this year.
Firebug?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've seen that a handful of times.
Can you elaborate a little bit about what that is?
So you've got, and for us it was usually teenage arsonist. A couple different ones that I remember through the years that would show up and be in the late teens, early 20s and want to join, and then you'd pick up on something that was not right, or they had some kind of criminal history that precluded them from being a member, and generally right down the road you'd see the calls that they would be creating, and it was just in an effort to see the fire truck. You'd start seeing those people on scenes, or you had a rash of calls and you saw the same person on several different fires, and then the next thing you know, there's an application sitting there for that person. That's a big red flag.
Or the other side of that, they get on the department, and then you start having random fires in places where you historically don't have fires. But hey, they're first on scene.
Happens.
Yeah.
That's wild. I never really thought about that.
Yeah, it's a thing. Like I said, we've had 3 people this year apply that I've called back and said no, thank you, because they had a questionable, directly fire related. I don't want to say criminal history, but they had a fire background.
It makes sense, because I've heard nurses doing that. They'll push a different type of medication and then get that hero complex saying, "Hey, look, I brought the patient back," when they were ultimately responsible for putting the patient down the drain. Makes sense to have a firefighter to start a fire and then try to go put it out.
It's a thing. Unfortunately, it is a thing.
And it doesn't see the boundaries of career or volunteer.
No, not at all.
That happens a lot. It happens a lot more than you think, but it's still pretty rare.
A career department would have the guy, except for he can't pass the mental background or the physical test or the criminal background. So he starts hitting volunteer departments that maybe aren't doing good interviews, good background checks, or criminal history searches. Or worst case scenario, someone they know walks them into the department and vouches for him and says, "Oh, Skippy over here, he's awesome. I've known him for 75 years, and he's 20. And he's been in town a week." It does happen. But again, I mean, everyone gets to deal with this. Arguably, you could say law enforcement has kind of been front row and center for about the last, we'll say 5 years.
Yeah.
And getting just hammered off this. Is there an answer to it? Good interviews, really good training, trusting the training officers. If they say no moss, you got to get rid of them. It's not up for debate.
Yeah.
And you got to do your due diligence.
Yeah. It's hard. Don't get me wrong, and they're still going to slip through the cracks. Just then you get to deal with it at that point. That's why you have a probationary period too.
Yeah.
Because most of that stuff lights in that 6 months. You see it.
It's hard to keep something a secret when you're around someone for a lot of hours.
Yeah. And that's why they encourage them to be here. You encourage them to, they can't skate through that probationary period and not show up. Just because that's the whole point of it. The point of it is for them to get to know you and you to get to know them. It's not to achieve some level of training, although we do that. That's not the point of it. The point of it is to have those interactions, to learn that person well enough to know that you want them to be here or you want to be around them.
Yeah, well, I've always told people on the probationary period, I tell them it's to make sure you're a fit for us and we're a fit for you.
Yep.
I've never once said it's a probation's complete upon completion of our training, because it's not. It's to make sure that you're a fit for our organization.
And some departments do it different than we do. Like we bring them in and we vote on them to be probationary, and then we start the process. Previously, we did where you had to have 2 months of coming to meetings and drills before you could even be voted on, just so that there was the opportunity for people to get to know you to some level, right? You're not going to know them thoroughly, but they're still going to do that 6 months after that. So it was really 8 months at that point.
Yeah, I would actually personally like to almost see something like that change here, where we still have the 6 month probationary period, but we'll call it another 6 months of a chief's probationary period. Basically where we can still get rid of you if we need to. Because in our organization, once you're voted on, it's actually quite a pain in the ass to get someone off the department.
Which
it really is.
Which it should be. And I think that for the most part, we let, 90% of them get to make that first step of that probationary period. And probably, 50% of them make it through that to some extent. And then you lose another 25% of that in the next 6 months, right?
Yeah.
So it's not, because it's not always rainbows and unicorns, right? There's you have to be willing to want to do physical hard work.
And the other side of that is that I know of one person that just bad luck on calls. Boy, they got on a particularly nasty call. It was a bad call, and it wasn't for them. To their credit, they told everyone and left pretty quickly. But, that happens too.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's truly not for everybody. And we've talked about it before, we're not doing all those, lie detector tests and psychoanalyzing and all these things that some of these career departments are doing, and the super extensive background checks, credit checks, a stool sample, all those things are not always in what we're doing for vetting these people, right?
Yeah, well, if they clear the block test and they manage to not push the triangle through the square, they're on.
Yeah.
That's our entrance exam.
But the safety net, though, is the department itself, is the membership because of that.
Yeah, I would
Absolutely.
argue there's three parts to the safety net. The first one is we do a legitimate background. Okay. And just a heads up to anyone that's perhaps under the age of 18, if you have an extensive background as a teenager, it's still on your record. Okay?
Yeah, it doesn't just vanish.
It doesn't. When they say your record is cleaned, that's a wives' tale. They just can't use that against you for any future crimes that you use or do commit. Okay? And technically, they're not supposed to use that in a, let's say, a quote-unquote background check as an employer, but it's still there. It just doesn't tell them if you were convicted, but it still shows that, you have family violence, drunk driving, bank robbery, and, drug use. It still shows it. It just doesn't show if you have any sort of convictions on it. So the background checks. Okay. Then we have the actual interview with the membership. Okay. And then the third one is the probationary phase. And realistically, between the three, they work, like Jesse's numbers, about 95% of the time. Every now and then, you get a sleeper that manages to get through there, and usually the ones that come around to bite you in the ass are the ones where they had the background check and there was something real questionable on the background check, and you're like, I don't know about that. And the second one is on the interview process. You find out through talking to other organizations that he's not popular anywhere. And he is crow-hopped and crow-hopped and crow-hopped and crow-hopped. What the hell makes you think that you're going to be the saving grace? I just take it from my experience. I highly recommend not bringing that person on.
One thing I was surprisingly shocked about was the interview process, how serious it was taken. When I had my interview, you had someone from pretty much every different block of life. So if you were lying about something, they were able to figure it out pretty quick. If you lied about something in the military or if you're just plain, because they do call their references. I was surprisingly shocked about that, the amount of detail that actually went into it and the questions that they had lined up. I thought it was just going to be me walking into a room and them saying, are you able to breathe? Yep. Okay, you're on. But it was legit questions and the background check.
And that happened because we've gotten burned in the past, personal experience. Mm-hmm. Real short story. There was an interview. He had an interesting work history, and it's along the lines of aviation, and I recognized it. And to me, it was a giant red flag. Well, if you don't work in aviation, you're not going to realize that that's a colossal red flag. And I saunter into the interview, and we sit there and go through it and nonchalantly get to his work history, and I start to go through it. And he's dodging this question hard. And I finally tell him, I'm like, man, I got an aviation background. This don't make any sense. I need you to tell me what the hell's going on here. Well, turned out that he had a DUI and an attempted manslaughter charge. Oh, that's why you got let go from that company.
Little red flag.
Oddly enough, somehow or another, that one missed the background check.
Wow.
The DUI was on his background, but that other charge wasn't.
It makes sense why the questions are the way they are. And also, the people that are doing the interviews do care about this department. So they actually take it seriously. And they actually want to know about you. And not just fill in the box saying, yes, I asked him this question.
And a lot of it, I mean, to be pedantic about it, you got to realize that basically we're picking dodgeball teams. Mm-hmm. And we want to make sure that we pick the people that's best for our dodgeball team. Yeah. And sometimes the guy that's the triathlete Ironman winner, that's not the guy for the team. We actually want the fat, goofy guy because he's perfect for our organization. And, again, this is where that interview comes in. And it's important to do good interviews. And for anyone that's not doing really good interviews and maybe you're struggling with the department, that might be something I'd tell you to kind of reevaluate is if you're having tons of problems with your department, figure out what's wrong with maybe the interview process so you can actually start scanning for the people that you want.
Mm-hmm. And then that third safety net, just the membership alone, because eventually you're going to be found out. Like how you are as a person will get found out because you spend a lot of time together. You get in your little niche groups here, but in the end of the day, even if you don't like someone, you're still family and you still spend a lot of time together, especially at this department. A lot of people put a lot of time into this.
Well, and that's what makes the fire service in general a lot like police and the military. You hear about the proverbial brotherhood. Well, because at the end of the day, even in our volunteer organization, you spend more time with each other than you do your own family.
100%.
And that's volunteer here. That's our culture. I know everyone's not like that, but in that particular case, that's very, very true here. And you do see that where good, bad, or indifferent, I see people that have relationships that are much stronger with their fellow firefighters than they are with their own families.
It was a giant motivating factor for me here because when I got out of the military, I was missing that. I was missing that camaraderie where you could go somewhere and when you look at someone that if I'm in a bad situation, they're going to try their best and they're going to do everything they can for me. And it's nice because when you get out, you feel a little lost on who you can trust. And when I found this organization, I didn't think that volunteer organizations were this tight niche, but I learned very quickly that especially this department, this name of the professionalism and just the family type structure has made it far beyond just our county lines.
Yeah, anyone that's former military does really well at our department. Like they do really well with us. Because again, we've got not necessarily a full out command structure, quite nearly as stringent or as regulated as like the actual military, but there's a definitive structure here, and we give people an opportunity to get away from God, family, and work, and find other like-minded people, and they can come here and, God. Speaking of God, we have a lot of people that have moved churches to go to the same church as their fellow firefighters.
I did.
That's a thing here. So yeah, we give them a chance for community and a place to belong. And because of that, there's going to be some guys with, basically a squirrel protecting their nuts. They don't want that. They don't want the community to become down. They want to make sure that you get into the Golden Woodchuck Club and you belong here.
So I'm gonna tell on myself here. So 20 plus years doing this, and I have this little quirky thing that I do, and I've traveled a fair amount, driven across this country several times. If I go to drive a long distance and travel, I travel in a fire department shirt because if I have an accident, I know that shirt's going to make sure that I get the best care.
Right.
Oh yeah.
No matter what happens. Like they're going to put extra effort into me and my vehicle and my family and whoever else is in there.
And I think the great benefit of pretty much having that family-like structure is how hard people are willing to work with each other when you're on scenes. Because we've seen other departments, and they still work great, but I think because of the family-type structure, we're willing to push each other, and because we know each other so well, we do know each other's limits. So we know who can do what and how far someone can go, not just in training, but just who they are.
All right, but again, make a military comparison. Again, if the cohesiveness is there, you don't have to be triathletes.
Mm-hmm.
Because the fact of the matter is that 10 guys can pull a ton quite easily and one guy can't.
Yeah.
So if you've attained that level of cohesiveness on your organization where they are acting, I won't go as far as to say a family unit. I would say maybe you're a little too close at that point. But if they're truly operating as one organism, as a cohesive group, and they're able to answer each other's questions without asking them, you're in a good spot. Yeah. You're in a really good spot. Now, the one thing I will emphasize, I have seen, and arguably I fall into this category, Jesse, you too, people who commit too much time to it. That's not necessarily a good thing either, because at the end of the day, this doesn't pay the bills. And I've seen some people make some pretty serious personal sacrifices to ensure that this organization perpetuates. I can say that for myself, but I also am single and don't have kids. So that isn't nearly as impactful as I'm thinking of one previous member particularly, where it was like, oh God, you are crushing everything that really should be more important to you because you're literally addicted to this.
The first thing that was told to me was by you, this profession is very addicting, but one thing that you have to remember is, like exactly like you said, it's not going to pay the bills. You can't throw away your family and your entire life just for this.
Yeah. And I'm sure if anyone's listening and they're just scratching their head, rolling their eyes, listening to this, if your department isn't like that, then I'm sorry for you, because ours is. It really is. It's really incredible at how tight right now. Don't get me wrong. We're on a uphill swing.
Yeah,
but we're in a good spot right now with the membership.
Oh yeah.
And the membership with each other. This is about as close to Wizard of Oz as everyone locking arms and whistling down the yellow brick road as I think we could possibly get. It'll be terrible whenever it shifts, but it will. And then you're back to the good interview process.
So, and along those lines, I've said it a lot of times, and we've talked about it before, but truly, our only job here is to make sure there's somebody to replace us, right? So when we come in and we go, we're not going to be here forever. It's just the fact of life. Like some of them we think have been here forever, but they're really not. It's a blip in time. But our purpose here is to make sure that we, A, find those replacements for us, and B, train them to the level of where we are, so that we can move on from that, because you don't move up until the guy below you can do your job. That's a fact. And then at some point we're going to retire, die, whatever, and not be here anymore. And so we need to make sure for the continuance of the organization that we're taking care of those steps to make sure there's people here to replace us. And that's probably one of the most important things that gets forgotten in some of that.
The only thing that I would add to that is, at the end of the day, the decisions that you're making for the organization, are they based on what's best for you as chief, or are they based on what's best for the organization? And if you're making your decisions based on what's best for the organization, then you're going to have a long and realistically prosperous career. The second that you start making decisions based on ease for you, and their personal decisions not based for the organization, that's where you're probably going to start having some pretty serious issues. And I think for the overall health of our organization right now, I think that's the huge difference between now and, let's say, just pick a previous time, whenever. is that we have so many people that are making decisions best for the organization that it's really incredible. And I think that's why we're on such a positive rebound uphill right now. Not only are we making progress and climbing, and we'll call it stature or, just recognition or acknowledgement, whatever, is the fact that there's not personal decisions being made as a whole by the department. There are decisions made to propagate and advance the organization. On the flip side of that, anyone that is making personal decisions, it's glaringly obvious.
Really obvious.
Because it's so abnormal and so out of standard that it's kind of a head scratching moment. And you're like, wow, that's not working at all. And it's not even reached its potential yet. And it usually fizzles and dies pretty quick right now because it goes against the flow so hard that it just gets engulfed and pushed back in the right direction, which is a godsend.
And that's exactly where I was going to spur off of that, because it's glaringly obvious when that person's true.
Not in team mode.
Right. And you look out in the front yard of the structure fire, right? And it looks like there's 20 or 30 firefighters out there, right? Because they all have the helmet, they all have the bunker gear, they all look the same. And they look like a team. But there's inevitably somebody that's not a team player. There's inevitably somebody that doesn't have a clue what we're doing right now because it's their first day or whatever, but it looks right. So we can look the part of the firefighter, and we can look the part of the leader, and we can look the part of the backbone of the community and not be that person. And that's where you've got to work at it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm going to brag on Jesse here real quick. The work, time, energy, and effort that Jesse and, Aiden, yeah, that's positive reflection on me right there. The work that Jesse and Aiden, and then literally the 50 other people that have helped with the colossal fire academy that we just finished, and I mean, the classic volunteerism's dead. Okay, maybe it's dead in your area. We just had a fire academy where we had 52 students enrolled, and for all intents and purposes completed a 16-week program and graduated 40, and only a small percentage of that is on our department. And it was 3 counties wide, and we had people kicking in the door for the next one. That didn't happen because we decided to crack open a book and do PowerPoint of death. The colossal amount of work that Jesse and Aiden, and again, all the instructors did, resulted in the word of this academy spreading like wildfire. And the colossal amount of interest that people are interested in now sending their people to this is truly staggering. I think if we really pushed it, which we won't do, but I think you could probably tentatively have that next academy as large as 100 people if you
I
wanted.
agree.
Which would be insane. Don't do that.
Yeah, that would be crazy.
But the
yeah.
reality of all of that is it falls back to understanding what leadership is, right? So we go into that event and that circumstance of, hey, we've got this momentous task. It wasn't about me or Aiden completing this task on our own. It was about dividing the work up and using people for their strengths and getting it down to a division of labor that made sense, right? Because there's no way any 1 or 2 people could have accomplished that with any form of success. Like, it would have been just this giant fiasco of this event that was not accomplishable without teamwork and effort. And I'm not bragging when I say it was just employing leadership skills.
From someone that's still kind of new, that didn't see the program beforehand, in my 2 years, the amount that this has exploded and the different wheels that are turning at the same time now is quite extraordinary. And also the level of training, there's a lot of knowledge that's really going into this. Like Chief said, we're not just sitting in a classroom. This is hands-on. You're getting sweaty. You're moving, and the entire time there's a structure there and there's a plan. It isn't just being winged. This is all structured.
Yeah, no, I mean, like the days we were doing burns, there was, I don't know, we'll say 45 students and there was 40 instructors.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about 85 plus people, not to mention all the other support that happened on that day. Probably 100 people for that one class, for that one day, for a volunteer organization. Nobody was paid. Going to kind of segue, but it's the same discussion point, and I mean this from my true perspective. You hear lead from the front. I actually truly don't operate or believe in that philosophy. What I do believe in is lead from the bottom. And what I mean by that is you as chief, at the end of the day, you're theoretically like Atlas holding up the world. I know it's a little melodramatic. Deal with me on that. Okay, but your membership knows that at the base they're supported. They know that you're there. And if you're holding everything steady, everything above you is fine. You're holding it together. And it gives them the chance to continue to build the foundation and work up from there. And in my little analogy, I truly believe that training's at the top, because training's going to set the standard. Training's going to be the one to set the rhythm on the drum, and that's going to trickle down from top to bottom. So you could say Atlas holding a pyramid. And I truly emphatically believe that training is so much more exponentially important than chief that it's to me it's laughable, because if you have your crap together in training, you have the department together, you just need to be there behind them or under them to actually support them and give them anything that they need to be able to hold it together. I truly emphatically believe that. And vice versa. If the chief's unsteady and they start to wobble, everyone else is going to lose footing too. The membership has to know that the leadership is there to support them.
And I believe that's extraordinarily obvious. When I first got on, Jesse, he came up to me, he said, if I don't know the answer, I'm the type of leader that I know how to find it, and I will find that answer for you. And I believe that's all the leadership here, that they might not know everything, but they know how to figure it out, and they will figure it out.
Yeah, well, that's just basic personality crap. Someone sitting there and just pulling your leg and the wool over your eyes and automatically lying to you, and you know it's a lie, even though you don't know what the hell the answer is. There's no way that's the answer. There's no faith. And it's that, that personal interaction where you're like, well, hell, if they're going to be that obvious, and they're not screwing with you, it's not a joke. It's obvious that they're digging in, they're doubling down on this, and it's obvious they're wrong, but they refuse to admit that they're wrong. Red flag. Yeah. How the hell do you have confidence or faith in that individual? It's 10 times easier to just sit there and say, I don't have a clue. Let's go find out.
I believe that's a true hallmark of a leader, is being able to say, I don't know.
Well, and I think the other piece of that is that what I do know is free for everybody, right?
Yes.
I'm not harboring information. I'm not harboring knowledge. That's not my tidbit of information that I'm keeping for myself. I want you to know as much
using
as
it as
I
a hostage.
Do you feel like that actually happens in some organizations? Some of the older members kind of use that as a weapon of, I know it and you don't?
100%. 100%. And it's so bad for the individual that does that. No one has any faith in that individual. They're disliked, period.
Well, and there's no benefit for anybody in that scenario. I worked for guys that just were that way, and the minute that you have more knowledge, you become a threat. Well, I'm not a threat. I'm just an asset with more knowledge, right?
It's just a resource that you're willingly pissing away. Yeah, I've seen it, experienced it,
Oh yeah.
had the privilege of going through it, and it's the same discussion point. One of the first things that truly infuriated me when I first joined this organization, I was with a member, and this is literally what they said to me, is I know what I'm doing, you don't, you need to do what I'm doing. And this is one of those scenarios where I don't know what the hell we're doing, but what you're doing is not the answer. I can physically see that's not how that's supposed to be done. And for me, for lack of better words, I never listened to another word that individual said, because frankly, that's not how you talk to me. I mean, if we're going to be pedantic about it, my life experience is 50 times what that individual's is, and my education's 1,000 times what that individual is. So if we're going to be pedantic about it, well, that's where we're at. I just don't trust you, and you're a liar. So good luck with that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the new guys, especially myself, are pretty coddled because I haven't had to experience pretty much any of that, what you guys have experienced. You guys have pretty much pushed out most of that negative that we've talked about today. I haven't had to see it, and most of the new guys here have never seen that at this department.
Well, and again, difference is that we're not dinosaurs. We're also basically, I'm almost middle-aged. Jesse's barely middle-aged. In the fire service, from a leadership perspective, we're young men, and we're just from a different generation. And then you combine that with the fact that, again, it's not personal. It's about the organization. My success is the success of the organization. My success is not based on what I accomplish here. My success is based off of what the organization achieves. And that's how I operate. So I'm only as good as the organization is. So almost any and everything I do is strictly based on what benefits the organization. And I do mean the organization first, then the membership. There are times, it's rare, but there are times when you truly need to protect the organization. Okay? There are times that even if the membership is adamant about whatever, and they want something to change or something to happen, you have to protect the organization.
You have any examples of something like that?
I have a great example.
Go ahead.
So, I was the president of the fire department for, 18, 19 years. I was assistant chief, division volunteer for 10 years. But early in that president deal, probably 2 or 3 years into it, the city had made some decisions that were drastically going to affect the fire department, right? And we were, as a group, not for what was happening. And literally it came down to, between the threats and everything else, that we literally had to stand up against the city, which is where you get your bread and butter. That's what makes you, right? And building that team and that camaraderie as the president at that time to stand up and do that was really kind of what that's about.
For me, I haven't had anything quite that theatrical. My stuff, a little bit of politics, particularly when I first became chief, a little bit of politics with the county. There was some programs that we should have been included in and we weren't. And then at the end of the day, I got burned and had made a mistake and it's the only time I've done it, and it's the only time I ever plan on doing it. Made a decision based on a personal friendship and protecting them instead of protecting the organization, and I got burned to the ground off of that. And arguably, if I wasn't in such good favor with the membership, I should have paid a pretty heavy political price on that, and I didn't. Basically got to get out of jail free on it. But like I said, you get that, like one of those. Will just make up a number every 50 years, and I used it early. So that's kind of an example of that, and it was clear cut. This was clear cut. It was in the rules. It was perfectly explained, and I just screwed up. It's just that simple, and I shouldn't have. But that's the one thing that's unique to volunteer versus career. Volunteer chiefs are put in that position all the time, where you have to make a decision that may protect the organization but really piss off a friend, and vice versa, where you protect the friend but you burn down the organization around you. You have to burn the friend every single time.
Yeah, and that's a hard lesson.
Yeah, it's not up for debate. You have to do that because, again, in our case, we're not, middle of nowhere volunteer fire department with a town of 200. By my own accord, I've really injected a lot of politics into our organization, with the state, with the county, with the city, with our neighboring departments, and you got to play by the literally policy and directives that drives your organization. Because if you don't, how do you have faith in the organization? Because you won't even back up, endorse, and support your own policies.
I think that's a good point of why it matters what chief you vote on, because it takes a very special person to look at someone that you care about and go, I'm sorry, but this organization has to stay alive.
Yeah, it just is, because, again, and I can go into great detail on this. I won't, but like I said, it was an absolute cancer for me for, we'll just say 8 months. Maybe longer, closer to a year. And it did. It was just a gift that didn't stop giving. Even though it ended in tears, my solution blew up in my face. That helped compound the problem. And from there, it just continued to spiral. And, it was ridiculous. And again, it was literally Looney Tunes. I was Elmer Fudd with a shotgun. Poking it around a tree and the barrel's wrapping around and aimed right at my butt, and pulled the trigger. And it's just not worth it. Too big of a headache.
But realize that going back to my scenario where you put in the department first, I had plenty of opportunities through the years to go from being the leader of the volunteer side of a combination department to stepping over to the career side of the combination department. Like that opportunity was afforded me multiple times throughout the years. And I saw my responsibility as the future of the volunteer fire department was more important than me taking that job and gaining a paycheck from it, right? And that was truly where I made the decision that the department was more important than me, carrying that through for many years doing that.
Do you think that because that paycheck is not involved, it makes them a little bit more delicate than a paid department?
No, because there's still the same personality stuff. There's still the thing, and I don't want to be the guy that's sitting here bashing the pay guys, because I got lots of good friends that are pay guys, and understand that of the volunteers and the pay, there's a rift there that happens, and even in the department, the combination department, there's a rift there that happens. But there's certain individuals that'll cross over and be so well respected in both circles that it doesn't matter, right? And I was lucky. And I say lucky, I was smart enough to know that that's where I had to be.
Yeah.
And I think it boils down to introspect. Like Matt and I both are people that think about things, and we look in on what's happening enough to understand the dynamics of the people that are involved and the situations to where we're that's helping us make better decisions as leaders. And that's not everybody can point the finger back at themselves and say, hey, I'm screwing that up.
Well, both of us don't make knee-jerk reaction decisions.
That helps
that's
a lot.
one trait that if you are that guy, boy, try and go ahead and get out of that mindset, because don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about a fire scene where you have to make a decision. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the administration of the department. No matter how good, bad, or obvious the decision is, don't just make it. Think about it.
Yeah, and don't be reactionary either.
Oh, yeah. It's not personal.
It's not reactionary. It's being preemptive in those decisions to see the things that are going to happen down the road, to the extent of that you have an understanding and you're able to make those decisions and those changes before the problems fester and become so bad that it's unfixable.
Right. Yeah. It's yeah. Again, I know we're getting really long here, but I'm perfectly fine with it. It goes back to what we were saying earlier. You're not making personal decisions. The second you're making personal decisions is the second that you're in trouble. If you're making the decision based on the organization, what's best for the organization, what's best for the membership. 99.999% of the time, those are the same.
Right.
Almost every single time. If you're taking care of the membership, you're taking care of the organization. Oddly enough, the membership makes up the organization. So if you're protecting that, you're doing your job.
And realize, too, that the organization in a general sense is resistive to change, right? So you've got to frame those things in the mindset that if you're affecting change, that you've got to sell that. You've got to be the salesman. You've got to be the HR department. You've got to be the wise man that came from afar. You've got to wear all those hats, and you've got to do all those jobs equally as well across the spectrum, because any one of those things will come back and bite you in the ass.
And this goes back to your point on the leadership. True leadership's communication. If you're truly wanting to instigate major change across your organization, then you have to communicate. Okay? And you got to get people to see and perceive and understand, for lack of better words, taste it, to see what this change is, what the pitfalls are of it, and what you're trying to accomplish. Because you can have someone adamantly opposed against that change, but at least they understand what's trying to change, and they're not necessarily going to fight you tooth and nail. They just may not agree with it. Whereas if you just do it cloak and dagger and come in and pound your fist and, by God, we're doing this, well, the entire department is going to be like, well, go pound sand. Yeah. Just out of principle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, your position is at the will of the department anyway, right? You're not appointed by God to your position, and you hold it until death. You're not the Supreme Court. You're not any of those things. So, it's not just dictatorial deal. You've got to frame it in a way that makes it palatable to everybody, even if it's a hard thing to do. And you've got to convince the membership that it's the right thing to do, and then live with the consequences if it's not.
Really good example of this you'll find in career departments. When you start to see the politics of the management, council, unions, chiefs, and they all start to square off against each other. And I've seen, just in our local area in the Metroplex, I've seen some whopper battles. And at the end of the day, who loses every single time?
The firefighter.
The firefighter. And I will argue, truly out of my depth, not knowing what I'm talking about, that it was ultimately the chief and the president of the unions that screwed it up because it became personal. You're going to do what I tell you, and if you don't, meh.
Done.
And there's a opportunity to sit there and put the time, energy, and effort, a colossal amount of it, into explaining why. Not telling them because, explaining why. And then you look at like other major departments that are real successful and have one hell of a culture behind them, and everyone loves everyone there. And you're like, well, how the hell does that actually work? Well, the common theme there is that the chief's telling the membership in the union what the hell's actually going on, and he's taking input from the union and the firefighters, and at the end of the day, he's doing the compromising.
Yeah.
And explaining to the city where the union's coming from and why and what they're facing, and these are the challenges, and God forbid this is what I'm adjusting to try and counter that. And you see that I know of 2 departments that are exceptional because of that, because they have the holy trinity of a union chief and city council management that gets along.
Don't have that internal war going on.
Yeah. You can see that a lot in the public safety departments.
Yeah.
So the ones that were truly successful as a public safety, so it's fire, police, EMS, all in one department. The ones that were truly successful at that model, it was because of the leadership. It was not because of anything else.
Yeah.
It was a specific person that made that function in the way that it was supposed to function.
You have to have a good foundation to be able to build a good, strong house.
Yep.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, but that applies at our level.
Yeah.
It really does. I mean, again, we've got so many different entities that we work with. We've got all the departments, different EMS agencies, different helicopter services. You've got PD, SO, commissioners, city council, city mayor, county judge. And you're just a ping pong ball between all of them. And your ability to not intentionally step on toes just because you don't want to put the extra 3 minutes worth of work into it, probably not the way to go. Yeah. Picking your battles, knowing when to have that time of, particularly in our case, because of the way we're funded, you have to know when to say no. And you don't get to play that card very often. So if you're going to play it, you better be right when you play it. Not just because I don't want to. You need to be right.
Trying to pick that battle must be a pretty big headache because there's so many different things.
I'll cut you off right there. You don't pick the battle.
It picks you.
Yeah.
Okay.
You just wait. And again, this is where the not being reactionary thing happens. You sit there and you're like, oh, okay, this is the direction they're going on. Let me get back to you on some stuff. Mm-hmm. And then you go get all your crap together, and then you go talk to them.
And you're like, this is all the reasons why not.
Right. And then there's the hardest part of that is knowing when to say, this is the one. Mm-hmm. That's the hard part right there.
Yeah, because you, like you were just saying, you only have so many cards, so you could just go, no.
Yeah.
Not a job I want.
Yeah, it's not that bad as long as you have a lot of alcohol.
Yeah, and being able to juggle.
It's like anything else. It's all the team that you build around you,
Yeah,
right?
100%.
Yeah. If you've got a good team around you and they're all focused on the same end goal, that stuff just comes natural. And back to Matt's point of you're making decisions based on the betterment of the organization. And if the more people that in the organization that take that mindset and that you can convince that's the mindset, the easier it is to come up against adversity or any of those things, because truly that's the team. You know, you have the on-scene team dynamic that's pretty easy to create, right? We can do that through training. But developing that other team dynamic of having the organization be first, and everybody's interpretation of what that is a little bit different. But having that dynamic makes it easy.
Oh yeah.
And from my perspective, not being a micromanager, so you've already got officers that are generally like-minded. Everyone wants the department and the membership to succeed. That's the criteria. Okay, we're good. Whatever the hell you want to do, go forth and do it.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the end of it. I'm not there to tell you, well, I need you to do it this way. No, just go do it. I frankly, I don't care how you do it. Now, if you have questions, ask. I'm all about questions. It's pretty obvious just from the length of this podcast. I can talk. That's not the issue. But the more I sit there and micromanage it and needle it, what the hell's the person in that position for?
Mm-hmm. You give them the job, but they're the ones that are supposed to figure out how to get that job done.
Realistically, you should never hear from me again unless you have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Or you need a check signed.
Roger.
As far as I'm concerned, that's how I want it run. Because you wouldn't be in the position if one, you didn't deserve it, and two, shouldn't be there.
And that's where that strong leadership comes from, that each level is able to depend on the level above them and below them.
Right.
Now,
And that doesn't mean that you don't help prod, poke, shape the ones below you, or even the ones above you, for that matter.
yeah, you can always hint.
Yeah.
Now, well, you could do it this way,
But-
or if it was me, I would just do this and then walk away.
And
So,
a successful leadership actually listens to that and gives it a thought. When you have that dictator mindset saying that I know what I'm doing and you're below me, apparently you don't, that's when the growth stops immediately.
our organization's too big for that to truly work here, especially the way I've set it up now. If you're a true micromanager, you'd be crushed within a month with the way I have the department set up right now. There's no way you could come in, say I get run over by a bus tomorrow, okay, and we have a little mini Stalin stepping up to the plate. They would literally die the proverbial death of 10,000 paper cuts in less than a month, because I have too good of officers that are too smart, too experienced, and they're too good with the people they work with and everyone around them to sit there and be stupid enough to sit there and be like, oh yeah, I can contribute to this.
Yeah.
No, training's perfect. Stay the hell out of their way. And if we have a particular subject for whatever reason in the world that needs to be trained on, maybe once or twice a year, I'll call Jesse, or we'll just sitting here randomly and I'll be like, hey, I saw this on scene the other day. Go ahead and cover that whenever you can. And shockingly, it gets covered. That's it. Yeah, we're lucky here. That's all I can say is that top down, bottom top, left to right, forward to back. Oh, God, we're in such a good spot right now. And to kind of segue back into our original topic, everything that we talked about is how you build, grow, and develop your podcast, your organization,
Your
whatever.
business.
Yeah, your personal business, your personal life, your personal relationships. Is all of this is applicable. It truly is. It's not just specific to an organization. You can build a hell of a career if you followed it.
Yeah.
And doing everything in your power to better everyone around you. And shockingly, it gets better for you.
And it's worked great for this department because from my times of doing clinicals at multiple paid different departments, EMS agencies, they'll ask me if I'm in fire. I'll say volunteer. They'll kind of shrug their head and I'll say, oh, I'm volunteer firefighter. And then they'll start the conversation. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, wow. Oh, yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit. I've heard about you guys.
Yeah, we're just different, and it sure as hell's nothing I did. I mean, we're a very old organization. Go back to the very early 1900s. There's been dozens of men before me, a lot of good, occasional questionable, but every single one of them just kept marching to progressing the organization, and it's all I'm here for. It's just to keep marching forward and make the organization as strong as I can. And at the end of the day, the organization's too big. I can't do it by myself. I have to have really awesome people, top to bottom. Again, the rookies have to be awesome. The officers have to be awesome. The old guys have to be awesome, because it won't work if everyone's not awesome.
Mm-hmm. You just got to leave it better than you found it, right?
Too many moving parts.
Yeah, it is. It's just there's so much to the way, and it's and everything I'm talking about is not call volume, and we're 2,000 calls a year. Everything I just talked about has nothing to do with call volume. Nothing. That's just a fact of life.
Mm-hmm.
That call volume to us is my dependency on oxygen. It's a fact.
Yeah.
So you have to figure out everything else that you're doing around the call volume. That's the standard calls.
Mm-hmm.
Because those aren't going away.
No. They're just going to keep building up.
All right. That is a long one. Where are we at?
2 hours.
Holy smokes. Okay. Well, Joseph, do you have anything great and convincing and epic to reveal to our mass of tens of listeners?
No, not really. I think this was a great insight in just how leadership really works at multiple different levels. And I've learned something, and I've been part of this department for 2 years, just how you guys think about things. And I think it's a good learning experience for anybody, even if you're not in the fire department, just for a business, how the pyramid of leadership goes from the bottom to the top, and every piece can't be taken out. Every piece is needed to be able to make this monster keep functioning.
Anything else, Jesse?
No, other than thanks for listening, and definitely hit us on the social media and do a review and all that good stuff. Believe it or not, we've had some success since we've been mentioning that a little bit more. So
we've even had a few questions, and by all means, search us out on Reddit or Twitter, or God forbid, send an email. If you have something particular or whatever just crazy that you want us to discuss, let us know. Other than that, we appreciate your time on this long one, and have a good evening.
Raw.
good night.